In 1984, 18-year-old Elisabeth Fritzl was imprisoned by her father, Josef Fritzl, in a concealed cellar beneath their family home in Amstetten, Austria. Josef had tricked Elisabeth into helping him with a fake task in the cellar, then locked her in a secret room he spent years to build. She remained there for 24 years, during which Josef repeatedly assaulted her, resulting in the birth of 7 children over the years. 3 of the children lived in captivity with Elisabeth, while the others were raised on the surface by Josef and his wife, Rosemarie, under the pretense that Elisabeth had abandoned them. The truth was discovered in 2008 when one of the children became seriously ill, leading to Josef's arrest and eventual conviction. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Who is Josef Fritzl, the man who drugged, kidnapped, and raped his own daughter for decades? Josef Fritzl was born on April 9, 1935 in Amstetten, Austria. He grew up during a tumultuous period, as the country was impacted by World War II and its aftermath. Fritzl was raised as an only child in a lower middle-class household. His father, an alcoholic who was also named Josef Fritzl Sr., abandoned the family when Josef was very young, 4 years old, reportedly leaving him and his mother, Maria Fritzl, born Nenning. Josef's relationship with his mother was deeply troubled and abusive. Josef described his mother as a strict and authoritarian Catholic. He recounted that Maria would frequently beat him, sometimes until he was bleeding, and would verbally abuse him, calling him Satan and a criminal. He will later explain that he was constantly feeling humiliated and powerless as he grew up without receiving any affection or warmth from her. No hugs, no kisses, nothing but violent discipline. She allegedly had him as an alibi child to prove she could be fertile. He will later reveal that even though nothing happened between them, he had strong, unfulfilled sexual fantasies towards his mother. He even congratulated himself for resisting his strong urges to consummate their relationship. He would also talk of having an evil streak that he was born with and fought against his entire life. At Amstetten Secondary Sports School, Fritzl initially had difficulties with his studies, but his work improved drastically after a teacher praised him and began taking an interest in the intelligent boy. He gained the reputation of a good student who never got into trouble. Josef ended up excelling in mathematics and physics. After finishing his studies at an HTL technical college with a degree in engineering, Fritzl landed a job at Voestalpine in Linz. Between 1969 and 1971, he worked at a construction materials company in Amstetten. He then transitioned into being a salesperson for equipment traveling across Austria. In 1956, and at the age of 21, Josef marries 17 years old Rosemarie, born 23 September 1939. Rosemarie was a young and naive girl whom he sought to dominate, contrasting with his cruel and manipulative mother. After their marriage, Rosemarie soon became pregnant, giving birth to their first child, Ulrika, followed by 6 more children over the years. Josef and Rosemarie Fritzl will have 7 children together, 2 sons and 5 daughters. Ulrika Fritzl, born in 1957. Ulrika was the eldest daughter in the Fritzl family. Gabriele Fritzl, born in 1958. Gabriele was the second daughter of Josef and Rosemarie. She, like her older sister Ulrika, grew up in a household dominated by her father's authoritarian presence. Josef Fritzl Jr., born in 1960. Josef Jr. was the first son and third child in the Fritzl family. Elisabeth Fritzl, born in 1966. Elisabeth was the 4th child and the 3rd daughter of Josef and Rosemarie. She was particularly targeted by Josef, who began abusing her at a young age, eventually imprisoning her in the cellar for 24 years. Elisabeth's relationship with her father was tragically complex. She was subjected to severe abuse, both physical and psychological, and was ultimately imprisoned in a hidden cellar where she bore 7 of his children. Elisabeth's story is central to the Fritzl case, as she endured unimaginable horrors at the hands of her father. Harold Fritzl, born in 1967. Harold was the fifth child and the second son of Josef and Rose Marie. Doris Fritzl, born in 1968. Doris was the sixth child and the fourth daughter of the Fritzl family. Rose Marie Fritzl Jr., born in 1972. Rose Marie Jr., the youngest of the Fritzl children, was named after her mother. Throughout his 20s, Josef Fritzl was known to Austrian law enforcement for indecent exposure. Shortly after his marriage, he was arrested for indecency, but this did not deter his wife, Rose Marie. He claimed to have spent 3 years in Ghana, engaging in affairs while leaving his family behind. Upon his return to Amstetten, their son Harold was born in 1963. During this time, Fritzl resumed work and frequently spied on women, eventually being suspected of attempting to rape a 21-year-old. Despite his behavior, Fritzl maintained a facade as a respectable, hard-working family man, regularly attending church with his wife and children. However, in 1960, he was sentenced to 18 months in jail for raping a 24-year-old nurse in her home in Linz. He served 12 months of the sentence and lost his job as a result. Over the decades, Fritzl was accused of 3 murders: 17-year-old Anna Neumeier in 1966, 17-year-old Martina Claudia Posch in 1986, and 42-year-old Gabriela Supakova in 1987-2007. After his imprisonment, he became more cautious but did not change his ways. In 1971, Fritzl and Rose Marie had 2 more children, Josef Jr. and Gabrielle. They moved into Josef's mother Maria's house under the pretense that she had died, but Fritzl later confessed to imprisoning her in a top-floor bedroom until her death in 1980. Fritzl began investing in property and opened a guest house at Monsey Lake while demanding strict obedience from his family. He terrorized them with physical violence, mirroring his mother's discipline style. And Rose Marie lived in constant fear of him. To Elisabeth, on April 16, 1966, Rose Marie Fritzl gave birth to their 4th child, Elisabeth. Since birth, her father developed a strange obsession with her, calling her Liesel and admiring her striking features. At age 11, Elisabeth was first raped by Josef. The following year, he began constructing a secret cellar beneath their home, disguised as a nuclear fallout shelter. As his obsession intensified, Josef took advantage of Elisabeth's isolation while her mother managed their guest house. In summer 1977, while Rose Marie was away, the sexual assaults escalated. Despite later denials, Elisabeth confided in friends about the ongoing abuse. Josef led a dual life, acting jovially at family dinners while simultaneously abusing her. His possessiveness increased as she matured. He imposed strict control over her movements and punished her harshly for disobedience. After completing compulsory education at 15, Elisabeth trained to be a waitress against her father's wishes to work at his guest house. In 1981, she finished her education but felt pressured to conform. After securing a job at a highway diner from her dad, she ran away to Vienna in January 1983, only to be found and returned home 3 weeks later. She re-enrolled in her course and completed it in mid-1984. The abuse transformed Elisabeth into a shy recluse. Friends of the family noted that Joseph's treatment of her was harsher than that of his other children, raising suspicions among friends. By 1978, he began planning to build a secret dungeon in the cellar to imprison Elisabeth permanently and fulfill his sadistic desires. Over 6 years, he executed an elaborate plan under the guise of home improvements, applying for state grants to fund his nuclear fallout shelter. He excavated tons of earth and designed the space for complete isolation and privacy, with ventilation systems and locked entrances. In early June, Elisabeth started a 2-month catering course in Waldeck. and fell in love with an 18-year-old student cook named Andreas Kruzik. They would meet secretly in the forest, but Elisabeth couldn't be intimate due to her traumatic past. She confided in Andreas about her difficult home life, without revealing the full extent of the abuse. On the final night of their course, after failing an exam, she wanted to stay with him after the party but was taken home by her parents early the next morning. A week later, feeling stressed about moving in with her sister Ulrika, she wrote her last letter to friend Ernst, sharing a cheerful Polaroid. Andreas sent passionate letters detailing plans to elope. However, when Josef discovered them, he exploded with rage and jealousy. By mid-August, worried about Andreas after not hearing from him, Elisabeth faced intensified abuse from her father upon returning home. He severely restricted her movements until the prison cellar was ready. The day Elisabeth disappeared. Tuesday, August 28, 1984 was a beautiful late summer day for Elisabeth. She got up and started to get ready for her shift at the Rosenberger restaurant. A little before 9 a.m., her father walked into her room and asked for help to move a heavy steel door in the cellar before she left for work. Elisabeth agreed and followed him down the 3 flights of stairs to his workroom, which led to the cellar. As they reached the entrance, he asked Elisabeth to help move the 272-kilogram steel and concrete door into place. But without warning, he suddenly shoved her into the cellar, grabbing the back of her head with one hand while pressing an ether-soaked handkerchief over her face with the other. Elisabeth struggled desperately to fight him off, but she was no match for the strong man. As she lost consciousness and collapsed to the floor, he quickly handcuffed her. He then dragged her through a long corridor lined with 7 doors, finally pulling her into his dungeon and throwing her onto a bed in the dark room. He raped her repeatedly, and once he was done, he turned off all the lights and left, carefully locking behind him the 8 heavy doors connecting the dungeon to his workroom. The investigation. When Elisabeth didn't return home after her shift at the restaurant, her mother, Rosemarie, became very worried. Josef reassured her, suggesting that Elisabeth had probably run away again. The next day, both parents went to the Amstetten police to report her missing. Josef appeared anxious and explained that Elisabeth had run away in the past, likely doing so again. They visited the Rosenberger restaurant, where Josef told Elisabeth's boss, Franz Perner, that she had run away and asked if he knew where she might have gone. Over the following days, Josef continued to pretend to search for Elisabeth, visiting train stations, homeless shelters, and bars, while criticizing her for causing trouble. Rosemarie even consulted a fortune teller in desperation. Less than a month after Elisabeth's capture, on September 21, 1984, her parents received a letter, supposedly from Elisabeth, claiming she had run off with a friend to join a religious cult and didn't want to live at home anymore. Josef had forced Elisabeth to write the letter, which he mailed from Braunau am Inn, 160 kilometers away, to create a misleading postmark. Rosemarie was reassured by the letter, believing her daughter was safe. Josef then contacted the Austrian ministry, Interpol, and made multiple angry visits to the Amstetten police, complaining about their lack of progress. He gave numerous emotional interviews to the media. The life of Elisabeth in the cellar. Throwback to the day. Elisabeth was pushed into the cellar. Day 1. Once her father grabbed the back of her head to push her for the first time into the cellar, Elisabeth tried to fight back. She lost consciousness after her dad made her breathe an ether-soaked handkerchief. She woke up in a dark room. She was handcuffed to a metal pole. She felt that she had been raped. As the drug slowly dissipated, she realized she has been imprisoned by her father. She lost track of time, but soon enough he came back. He turned the light back up and raped her again multiple times before leaving her with a bowl of food. Once he left, she screamed and banged on the walls as hard as she could, but the soundproof dungeon prevented her screams from reaching any other living creature. Day 3. 2 days after she got locked in the cellar by her father, Elisabeth heard him come back with more food. He also wanted to rape her again. Elisabeth fought back, but he beat her with his fists until she gave up and stopped resisting. He tied a 2-meter cable around her waist to allow her to use the small toilets he installed in her 4x4 meters prison. He also attached another chain around her stomach. Week 3. Elisabeth was kept in the dark, humid prison with a low ceiling. Josef designed the ventilation system to provide barely enough oxygen for her survival, making her tired and lethargic. Several times a day, he would come to rape her, giving her scraps of food as a reward. Andreas Kruzik, Elisabeth's boyfriend, grew worried. He sent letters but never received any answer, so he called her parents. Josef told him Elisabeth was not available and to never call again. Andreas ended up heartbroken, thinking Elisabeth didn't want to be with him anymore. Month 9. Josef gradually wore down Elisabeth until she gave up, accepting her sex slave fate. She kept shaking every time she would hear him open gradually the 8 electronic doors separating them. Josef gradually softened his behavior, stopped beating up Elisabeth, and started to arrive in the cellar with clothes, blankets, small presents, in some kind of courting ritual. Dr. Abloh, psychiatrist that analyzed on the case, believes it was some kind of manipulation to trigger a Stockholm syndrome in Elisabeth. He got softer during the rapes and stopped using contraception as to get her pregnant. Soon he was spending entire nights in the cellar, telling his wife he was busy with a new project that would make them rich. Year 2. Elisabeth became pregnant with her father's child after yet another rape, and fell into deep depression. When she miscarried alone at 10 weeks, she wanted to attempt suicide. Her father disposed of the fetus and turned the lights off to punish her. Year 4. In 1988, Elisabeth Fritzl became pregnant again. Now 22 years old, she was terrified of her father's reaction. Once she finally told him, thinking he would take her to the hospital to abort and she would have a chance to escape, Josef gave her medical books and told her, "Don't think you're getting away from me so easily." At this point, Josef saw his daughter as his new wife. He gradually became less violent, and as her belly started to show, he stopped raping her, no longer attracted to her. She delivered her baby girl alone, cut the umbilical cord alone, and named the girl Kirsten. From this point, she will become a devoted mother. After giving birth, the rapes started again in front of the baby. Kirsten suffered from cramps and epilepsy, but Josef couldn't care less. He then demanded Elisabeth for more children, as she was now his new wife. A couple of months after Kirsten's birth, she became pregnant again. 1989, year 5. Elisabeth gave birth to a baby boy she named Stefan. Every time she noted their birth date on a little piece of paper. 1991. Elisabeth became pregnant for the 4th time, giving birth to her second daughter, Lisa. Elisabeth then started to beg for more room in the dungeon as it was becoming incredibly hard to live in the small, secluded area and be raped by her dad in front of her children. He agreed and let her, and then later her children as well, to dig with their bare hands the soil he would remove every evening. 1993. As taking care of 2 families became difficult for Josef, and as he learned of a new allowance, he decided to take Lisa to the surface to raise her with his wife Rosemarie under the pretense that Elisabeth dropped her at their house because she couldn't take care of her at the cult. Dear parents, I hope that you are all healthy. You will probably be shocked to hear from me after all these years, and with a real live surprise no less. I am leaving you my little daughter Lisa. Take good care of my little girl. I'm still living in the cult with a daughter, Kirsten, and a son, Stefan, but unfortunately they did not approve of me having any more children. I breastfed her for about 6.5 months, and she now drinks her milk from the bottle. She is a good girl, and she eats everything else from the spoon. I will contact you again later, and I beg you not to look for me, because I am doing well. It would be useless, and would only increase my suffering and that of my children. Neither are too many children or education desired there." He then took Lisa to the surface and pretended he had just found her. In 1994, after a long process, a DNA test, and a handwriting analysis, Josef Fritzl and Rosemarie Fritzl were officially allowed to adopt baby Lisa Fritzl. And as the criminal record of Josef was expunged after 15 years of the rape, he committed that sent him to prison for 18 months. He was allowed to have the right to adopt Lisa. The same year, Elisabeth and the children completed a narrow passageway connecting the dungeon to 2 other rooms. He brought a double bed to continue to rape Elisabeth, but also a television. As the years passed, Elisabeth taught her kids to read, walk, talk, and insisted to give them a proper education. She talked about the world upstairs, but never telling them they were prisoners. She would tell them the difference between day and night, describing the sun, the moon, and nature. 1994. In June, she became pregnant again and gave birth to a little girl named Monica. 9 months later, Josef took her and brought her to the surface as well, faking again a letter from Elisabeth asking her parents to take care of her baby. "I'm really sorry that I had to turn to you again. I hope Lisa is doing well. She must have grown a bit by now. Monica is now 9.5 months old. She was breastfed for 7.5 months. She now eats almost anything, but she still likes the bottle best. The hole at the teat has to be a little bigger for her." In total, in allowance, Josef accumulated $2,700 every month by adopting and fostering her daughter's children. He bought a Mercedes-Benz, dressed in expensive tailor-made Italian suits. April 29, 1996. Elisabeth, after becoming pregnant 9 months before, gave birth to 2 twin boys, Alex and Michael. Michael soon developed severe respiratory problems. He died in her mother's arms. Josef Fritzl was furious. He picked up his dead son's body and stormed over to the incinerator, used to dispose of the cellar garbage, and threw it in. After this event, Josef brought more gifts to the family: a radio, a new television, and a VCR, but also old carpets, chairs, tables, and kitchen utensils. Elisabeth was teaching her kids for 3 hours a day. Basic math, history, and geography, using textbooks her father brought. The rapes continued as he bought lingerie for her, forced her to watch hardcore pornographic tapes on the VCR, and then forced her to reenact his favorite scenes in the rape room. August 3rd, 1997. Alexander, the surviving twin that Elisabeth gave birth to, was also brought upstairs by Josef to be raised by his wife and him to get more allowance, now earning $4,200 per month for Elisabeth's 3 children. The end of the nightmare. The chain of events that led to the end of the nightmare began earlier in April 2008, when Kirsten Fritzl, Elisabeth's eldest daughter, fell seriously ill. Kirsten had never seen the outside world. As her condition worsened, Elisabeth managed to persuade Josef to take her to the hospital, recognizing that her daughter's life was in grave danger. Josef, realizing that he could no longer manage the situation on his own, agreed. On April 19th, Josef Fritzl took the 19-year-old Kirsten to the Amstetten hospital. He claimed to the medical staff that he had found her unconscious on his doorstep, along with a note from Elisabeth, saying she could no longer care for her daughter. The doctors, however, were immediately suspicious due to Kirsten's severely malnourished state and the fact that her medical history was entirely unknown. They placed Kirsten in intensive care due to her life-threatening condition. As Kirsten's condition remained critical, the hospital staff became increasingly concerned about her background. They notified the police, who began an investigation into the mysterious circumstances surrounding Kirsten's appearance. The police made public appeals for Elisabeth to come forward, believing she was the key to understanding Kirsten's condition. These appeals were broadcast widely, increasing the pressure on Josef. Fearing that the authorities were closing in and with his carefully constructed lie starting to unravel, Josef made a pivotal decision. He allowed Elisabeth and her 2 remaining children in the cellar, Stefan and Felix, to leave the cellar for the first time in 24 years. On April 26, 2008, Josef brought Elisabeth, Stefan, and Felix out of the cellar and took them to the hospital under the pretense of needing Elisabeth's help to provide information about Kirsten's medical history. At the hospital, Elisabeth and her children's strange appearance and behavior immediately caught the attention of the staff. Recognizing the opportunity, Elisabeth quietly confided in the doctors, revealing her true identity and the horrific ordeal she and her children had endured. She pleaded with the doctors not to allow Josef to see them and told them everything about her captivity. Once the truth was revealed, the hospital staff informed the police, who immediately took Elisabeth and her children into protective custody. Elisabeth was promised that she would never have to see her father again if she told the full story. Finally feeling safe, she gave an extensive and detailed account of the 24 years of abuse and imprisonment she had suffered at the hands of her father. Later that same day, Josef Fritzl was arrested by the Austrian police. His arrest marked the end of the nightmare for Elisabeth and her children. The police, acting on the information provided by Elisabeth, conducted a search of the Fritzl family home and discovered the cellar where Elisabeth and her children had been held captive. The trial. Before the trial, Josef underwent a psychiatric evaluation which determined that he was fit to stand trial, but suffered from a severe personality disorder. The evaluation highlighted his need for control and his incapacity to feel remorse, characteristics that were crucial in understanding his motivations. Facing irrefutable evidence and in the wake of Elisabeth's testimony, Josef Fritzl eventually confessed to most of the charges, though he continued to minimize his responsibility and tried to justify his actions as a way of protecting his daughter. The trial began on March 16, 2009, at the Regional Court of St. Pölten, Austria. The proceedings attracted widespread media attention, with reporters from around the world covering the case. Charges. Josef Fritzl faced multiple charges, including murder by neglect, for the death of Michael, one of the twin boys born in captivity who died shortly after birth due to a lack of medical care. Enslavement, for imprisoning Elisabeth and her children in the cellar for 24 years. Rape, for repeatedly raping Elisabeth over the course of her captivity. Incest, for fathering 7 children with his daughter. Coercion, false imprisonment, and assault, for the physical and psychological abuse inflicted on Elisabeth and her children. One of the most critical elements of the trial was Elisabeth Fritzl's testimony, which was pre-recorded and played in a closed session to protect her privacy. Her detailed account of the years of abuse and suffering was devastating and left little room for doubt about Josef's guilt. The trial also featured testimonies from forensic experts, doctors, and psychologists who described the physical and psychological impact of Josef's crimes on Elisabeth and her children. Josef Fritzl's defense team attempted to argue that he was not fully responsible for his actions due to his mental state. They also claimed that he had provided for his daughter and her children, which they suggested mitigated his crimes. However, this defense was widely regarded as weak and failed to gather much sympathy. On March 19, 2009, after 4 days of proceedings, the jury found Josef Fritzl guilty on all counts. The evidence presented during the trial, combined with Elisabeth's powerful testimony, left no doubt about his culpability. Josef Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge ruled that he would serve his sentence in a psychiatric facility for the criminally insane, given his diagnosed personality disorder. The court also emphasized the severity and inhumanity of his crimes, ensuring that he would never be released. Right after the trial, Rosemarie Fritzl asked for divorce.